Listening?
Yes.
All right. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for our press briefing with regard to what the state is doing to slow the spread of coronavirus here in Nebraska, among other topics. We'll start off with, again, just highlighting kind of the key measurement that we've been looking at throughout this entire pandemic, which has been hospital capacity. We've got 41% of our hospital beds are available, 41% of our ICU beds are available, and again, one of those key indicators that 77% of our ventilators are available. Throughout the entire pandemic, we've been able to make sure we've been able to provide that hospital bed, that ICU bed, or that ventilator to anybody who needs it when they need it, and that has continued to be true. So we're very pleased about that. Also, just again, we want to remind people about the kind of the pillars we're using to address that hospital capacity. It's about testing, making sure we find the people who have been infected with coronavirus, contact tracing, get those folks to isolate, and then have their contacts, the people they've been in touch with over the last 2 weeks, make sure they're monitoring their conditions or quarantined depending on their level of contact. Having the lodging available for folks who can't do that at home, who can't isolate or quarantine at home, make sure that's available, but also for our healthcare providers, our first responders. Having the appropriate personal protective equipment for folks in our healthcare system. We've got 90-day supply on hand right now for things like gowns and masks and gloves and so forth. And then we've got specific programs around at-risk communities we've talked a lot about, for example, long-term care facilities. And then, of course, our guidelines and DHMs, the rules that we put out about how we slow the spread of virus, those non-pharmaceutical interventions. All that has helped us keep that hospital capacity really robust. Also, with regard to testing, in Test Nebraska next week, we will be in Chadron, Alliance, Scottsbluff, Sidney, Burwell, Kearney, Norfolk, O'Neill, Valentine, Columbus, York, Lincoln, Falls City, Bellevue, and Omaha. So those are the places that we will be running our Test Nebraska program. Now, to change subjects somewhat, generally, in May, I proclaim May Renewable Fuels Month here in the state of Nebraska. Renewable fuels are a big part of our economy here in the state. For example, we have 25 ethanol plants. They are about a $5 billion invested base. They employ about 1,400 people directly in our small towns and rural communities. They're great paying jobs. And of course, ethanol is also great for our state because about 40% of our corn crop goes to it. And then, of course, when consumers buy ethanol, they save money at the pump. And so whenever I talk about ethanol in particular, I want to remind people that there's 3 great reasons why you should be making sure you're using ethanol blends in your car. You're going to save money at the pump when you fill up with that. It's going to be great to help clean up the environment. It reduces things like carbon emissions and so forth. And then also, it is great for our farmers and ranchers because, again, 40% of our corn crop goes to that. There's also a byproduct called distillers grains that goes to feed our livestock. Cattle is our #1 industry here in the state. So all these things kind of go together in a really synergistic way we call the Golden Triangle. We've got Jan Tenbensel here, with who's chair of the Ethanol Board. So Jan, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate you being here to help support Renewable Fuels Month. And I've got a proclamation here, which I am not going to read the whole thing, but suffice to say, we want to proclaim Renewable Fuels Month here in Nebraska. Like I said, we typically do that in May, but we're going to do it in June this year. And so we are proclaimed Renewable Fuels Month here in Nebraska. And so I want to remind people, go fill up with ethanol. You're going to save money at the pump. Great for the environment. Helps our farmers and ranchers. And with that, I'd like to call up Scott Ritzman, who is the Executive Director for the Nebraska Soybean Board, to be able to talk a little bit about Renewable Fuels Month as well. So Scott, would you please come up and join us?
So on behalf of Nebraska's corn and soybean farmers, I would like to thank Governor Ricketts for proclaiming June Renewable Fuels Month. Renewable fuels like ethanol and biodiesel continue to be viable sources of energy for Nebraska and the U.S. In the last decade, biodiesel demand for soybean oil has grown 300%, and in the last year, producers used more than 8 billion pounds of soybean oil. Demand for biodiesel increases the demand for soybean oil, boosting value of soybeans, reducing the price of the meal fed to poultry and livestock. Biodiesel also provides 60,000 American jobs. After more than 25 years, biodiesel has grown to add more than $12 billion in the U.S. economy, soybean farmers continue to support the most tested renewable fuels on the market. In addition, as our nation's #2 ethanol producing state, the industry supports over 1,400 jobs in rural Nebraska, not counting the thousands of corn producers and livestock producers who feed distiller grains to their livestock. By producing nearly 2.1 billion gallons of ethanol and 6.4 million metric tons of distiller grains annually, Nebraska's ethanol industry provides our state with $5 billion of capital investments. Renewable fuels provide an available and proven path towards decarbonizing the transportation sector, driving economic growth, creating jobs, and improving air quality. They exist to provide consumers with clean burning, domestically produced fuel options that are better for the environment, great for their engines, and good for their wallets. Thanks again, Governor Ricketts.
Great, thank you very much, Scott. And Nebraska is the number two ethanol producing state. So great thing for us to be able to promote renewable fuels. Now, we've seen a lot of stories through this pandemic about how Americans have pitched in to help, whether it's sewing cloth masks or using their 3D printers to make face shields and so forth. Another great story about innovation and people pitching in is right here in Nebraska with regard to our ethanol industry and the University of Nebraska. The two together have pitched in to be able to create hand sanitizer. This is something that has been in short supply since the pandemic started. And so the University of Nebraska and the Innovation Campus have worked together with Green Plains to be able to take the alcohol they're producing at Green Plains and put it together to make hand sanitizer. And Jan Ten-Benzel was just talking about how this would not have happened without President Carter and Todd Becker from Green Plains working together. We've got both of them here this afternoon. So first, I'd like to call up President Carter to be able to talk a little about the innovation that you're doing there from the university standpoint. We got it prominently displayed right there.
Thank you, Governor. And as you can all see, we do have the University of Nebraska hand sanitizer in the multi-gallon size here. And I know it's been here since the governor's been doing press conferences, and now we have a chance to talk a little bit about it. I want to say, first of all, thank you to the governor for the invitation. I also want to say thank you to Mr. Todd Becker and Green Plains for their partnership and the generous donation of ethanol that's helped make this project possible. One of the several industry partners in this effort, and a great example of how the university, industry, and state can come together to meet the needs of all Nebraskans. The real stars of this, though, and I want to highlight this today, are our faculty. They are doing this on top of their regular jobs. They recognize the urgent need, stepped up, and worked literally around the clock to make this happen. I want to recognize in particular Hunter Flodman, Engineering Assistant Professor of Practice at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, and Terry Howell, Executive Director of UNL's Food Processing Center. Those two gentlemen did work around the clock, and in fact, they have produced 110,000 gallons of hand sanitizer in conjunction with this ethanol thus far. And on top of that, a public crowdfunding campaign has come together to raise over $50,000 so far. That's double the original goal. So this is what I have come to love about Nebraskans in my relatively short time being here in the state. Where there's a need, Nebraskans step up. Just last week, a shipment of the hand sanitizer went to the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce for distribution to nonprofits associated with COVID-19. This week, shipments are going to meatpacking communities to include Fremont and Columbus, and they're going to be used by local businesses and community members. This week, a shipment will also go to the Omaha Chamber for distribution to Omaha daycares. And over the next 6 weeks to 2 months, the project will deliver 60,000 gallons of hand sanitizer to Nebraska's ESUs for use by K-12 schools in the upcoming academic year. And just across our own campuses at UNL, for example, 25,000 gallons are going to be used. So I'm very proud of our faculty and staff for leading this effort. Now, I might want to just say a quick word about what we have coming up here in the next 2.5 months. As many of you have written about in the press or you've read, we are planning to be open in the fall. We'll be welcoming our 51,000 students back to campus no later than August 24th, our 20,000 faculty and staff included. And we have done a tremendous amount of work on this. And this goes right in hand with all the things that we need to do to be open, to include bring in personal protective equipment and have things like hand sanitizer at the ready. But you also may have noticed that we've introduced a number of strategic initiatives, not the least of which was on April 17th, introducing Nebraska Promise, free tuition to our future students whose families have a adjusted gross income of $60,000 or less. We have frozen tuition for 2 years. We've made an adjustment to our academic calendar. All these things have been done for the benefit of Nebraskan students, and they have shown us their appreciation. In just the last 6 weeks, we have seen applications in terms of raw numbers from future Nebraska students go up 21%, well over 2,000 applications. In fact, if you were to compare the number of applications we had at this time last year to where we are right now, it's still an increase of over 8%. Now, we'll see how that turns into actual enrollment, but where most universities across the nation are worried about a 15% drop in enrollment, Nebraskans have showed us that they have stepped up and they want to be on our campuses in person. So I'm very excited about the future and what we're going to have here at our university system. I'm thankful for our faculty and staff who all come together to work together to solve problems. And I'm thankful for Governor Ricketts for what he has said that we should be focusing on in the future, and that is to continue to grow Nebraska. Thank you all very much. Back to you, Governor.
Thank you, President Carter. And again, getting open, got the hand sanitizer, you're making yourselves. Good deal, right? All right. Well, again, the type of innovation that we've seen from American industry is really amazing. And Green Plains really represents that with regard to what they did with regard to their part in the hand sanitizer. Taking their facilities, which produce ethanol for fuel, and retooling them to be able to provide that alcohol then to be able to go into hand sanitizer. So I've got the CEO of Green Plains, Todd Becker, here. So Todd, would you come up and talk to us a little bit about that, please?
Thanks, Governor, and thanks for having us today. Yeah, we have a very special plant at Green Plains in York, Nebraska. It actually does not make fuel grade. It was originally a beverage grade plant that we retrofitted into an industrial grade plant that actually, during this time of COVID, we found that it was the exact ingredient needed for hand sanitizer and cleaning materials across the United States. And so our employees got into action, and we worked together with the University of Nebraska. When they called, we thought it would be a small program. The next thing you know, we're over 160,000 gallons shipped that we're donating as a company from our employees and our shareholders and our owners. It's over almost $1 million in alcohol that we've donated to the state, and it really makes our company proud because we know that we're helping medical facilities, nursing homes, schools across Nebraska. USDA field offices asked for donations, the University of Nebraska, so that they can reopen their campus this fall, as well as obviously the K-12 schools. And so, this also helps the rural economy. So as we have this very special plant in Nebraska, we're shipping that product now all over the world for use in cleaning materials and hand sanitizer because it's not a fuel grade facility. It's a FCC grade facility or a food codex facility. And so luckily we have it, and luckily we're able to share what we have as well as a company with the state. We're the largest producer of ethanol in the state of Nebraska, and during Renewable Fuels Month, obviously we're very proud to participate in things like this. It's a huge impact on our local economies, our rural economies. Ethanol across the United States supports over 400,000 jobs, and it's such an important part of keeping small towns vibrant and alive, and that's really what the ethanol industry is doing. So we're just very fortunate. Even as people were not driving at our company, we were able to keep our York plant open because of this program, and we'll continue to donate to the state as they need it. Obviously, we're selling to major consumer companies as well around the world, but this is something I think is very special and something that we're actually pretty lucky as a company and as a state and a population in Nebraska to have this plant located here, because it's really only one of about 5 plants across the United States that can produce a product of this quality that can go into this quantity of hand sanitizer in the state. So thank you, Governor, for your support, and we're very proud to work with the state. Our employees are very excited about it, and we'll continue to do whatever is needed.
And Todd, hey, do me a favor, please take the proclamation as a token of our appreciation for all the donations for the alcohol that goes into the hand sanitizer.
Thank
We
you
appreciate
very much.
it.
We appreciate that.
Thanks. All right. Next, I want to talk just real briefly about the Paycheck Protection Program. That is the program the Small Business Administration is put out there, where community banks work with their small businesses to be able to provide that loan, and had been re-upped and so forth. We've been able to confirm with the SBA that Nebraska has received $3.395 billion as part of that. Sorry, yeah, that's right. And so, but as part of that process, when the two different programs, we had actually double counted the numbers from the federal government, and so we had reported that the total amount of aid coming to the state was $10.8 billion. We want to adjust that to $7.8 billion because we had double counted that number as part of the way the government was reporting that. So just wanted to make that correction so that it's $7.8 billion, the amount of federal aid that the state has received so far. As far as an upcoming schedule, we're going to have a 2 p.m. briefing tomorrow afternoon, Friday. We've got a special announcement for that, so wanted to give everybody a heads up about that. We do have the 3 p.m. Spanish language briefing immediately following this press conference, so we're going to try and make sure we get this one wrapped up in time to do that transition. And then next week, we'll be planning on the 2 p.m. English briefing on Monday and Thursday with a 3 p.m. Spanish briefing on Thursday next week. So that's kind of the upcoming schedules for things we've got coming. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and then roll into questions and answers. So first of all, from Mona Weatherly, Custer County Chief, is the state still targeting 3,000 tests a day through Test Nebraska? And the answer is yes. We actually have the capacity at the lab to do over 3,000 tests per day. And then when we have it scheduled now, I gave you kind of the schedule for where Test Nebraska is going next week. When we have our teams in Omaha and Lincoln, obviously a bigger population base, we'll have over 3,000 test slots available on a daily basis. So now it's really just about trying to get people signed up and tested. And we'll, I think, a couple days ago, we hit 2,400 tests through Test Nebraska. So we do want to continue to ramp up toward that 3,000 tests. The way we're going to be able to have that many schedules when we're in Omaha and Lincoln. Now, we will still need to go, as I read earlier, to other parts of our state where we don't have as high a population, and we'll go to those places. We do want to get as many people scheduled as possible. We're just not going to get as many people as we can get in Omaha and Lincoln. But yes, we're still targeting to have that, and we've got the capacity to be able to do it. Can this goal be reached without testing asymptomatic people? And kind of the flip side question is that, do we have enough people who have symptoms or possible exposure to reach the goal without including those who have no symptoms? So we actually just recently relaxed some of the restrictions in just about everywhere in the state, so anybody who signed up can get it. And then in the Douglas County area, it's ages 15 to 35. We've kind of loosened the restrictions there so those folks can go get tested. And so yes, we are testing asymptomatic people. So it is much broader base as we're going in, and that's part of how we will get a broader swath of the population to be able to get tested. But those people are not symptomatic necessarily. So we will reaching the 3,000 tests with people who are not symptomatic. Does the 3,000 goal include testing with only Test Nebraska, or does it include private testing, public health testing, et cetera? So the 3,000 tests per day is just Test Nebraska. We also have the testing from the Nebraska Public Health Lab, UNMC. You've got the commercial labs out there like LabCorp and Quest. So we do have other channels that we are doing testing through, and that's all on top of what we're doing through Test Nebraska. So the 3,000 is specifically focused around the Test Nebraska. And like I said, we've got the capacity to be able to do it. We just need to get people signed up so we can make that happen. And Taylor, you have other questions texted in?
John Kipper with KMTV wants to know if you have a comment on the letter state senators sent you regarding CARES Act funds yesterday.
So John Kipper wants to know about from KMTV, KETV? KMTV, thank you. Wants to know about the letter that state senators sent in with regard to the CARES Act money. And again, we announced that we're working with Deloitte & Touche, so we will have transparency up there with regard to the, how that money is being distributed and so forth. We will have a website out there so the public can be able to see all that with regard to all that information. And stay tuned with regard to, again, some of the other programs that we got out there, because we'll have those application processes. So watch for those sort of things.
Maureen with KETV would like to know, are you able to get tested multiple times through Test Nebraska, and if so, what are the conditions?
Maureen with KETV wants to know, can you get tested multiple times through Test Nebraska? And the answer is yes. I think we've had a little over 100 people get tested multiple times. I don't know what the current number is, but I think we've had that. And again, so for example, one of the things we ask people to do is to update their status. So we'll send out those weekly emails if your status has changed, and of course symptoms can develop quickly. That could be one of the reasons, or You might get asked to get tested again because we changed some of the criteria, so it is possible for people to get tested more than once, but as I said, it's not a huge number that's doing it.
Sherelle from Fox 42 would like to know, will restrictions snap back if there's a second wave of coronavirus cases? And what is the indicator that would lead those restrictions to go back in place?
I'm sorry, who's Sherelle with?
Fox 42.
Sherelle with Fox 42 wants to know, would we put more restrictions in place, and under what conditions would we put those restrictions in place in the future? And certainly, we're going to use all the tools we need to be able to manage this. Our expectation is, though, that as we build up the capacity, especially going back over our chart here with testing and contact tracing, that's really how you manage these type of outbreaks, right? Whether it's coronavirus or anything else. And you manage it that way by finding the people who've been infected. You get them out of the general population, get them to isolate. You go back and find out who they've been in touch with. You get those folks to either monitor their symptoms or quarantine, whatever's appropriate, depending on their level of contact with that person, and make sure that they're not infecting other folks. And that's really the blocking and tackling of epidemiology to allow us to be able to control those outbreaks. So while we're certainly going to keep in our playbook the ability to tighten restrictions back up again, the fact that we have got a robust contact tracing and testing program is really what's going to be different from where we were a few months ago. So, as we ramp up things like Test Nebraska and have the ability to do more testing, I talked about contact tracing in the past, where now we've got over 700 people that are trained to do that contact tracing. So and we've got other additional improvements we want to continue to make as far as making sure we're getting the data back to public health directors as fast as possible and that sort of thing. So we've got continued work to do to be able to make sure we can improve upon that system. But that's really going to be the core of how we look at future outbreaks and how we're going to handle them. And ultimately, it will all get back to that hospital capacity at the top, making sure that we continue to have that hospital capacity. And as I gave you the numbers earlier, with 41% of hospital and ICU beds and 77% of ventilators available, we have robust hospital capacity here in the state of Nebraska.
That's all I got, Matt.
Okay. Questions from inside the room? Fred, I see you pulled down your mask, so you're ready to ask a question. Fred said he's disclosing his identity.
The letter from the senators also suggested public input into how the money is spent and the appointment of an ombudsperson to whom people could appeal if they felt aggrieved by any of the spending decisions.
Right.
Are those good ideas?
So the question was about an ombudsman where people could appeal, and what was the other one? Public comment, right? So, yeah, public input. The first one you asked about public input. So when we did put together these programs like the one for, say, small business as an example, we had Tony Goins, our Director for Economic Development, put together a group of small business folks to be able to reach out to the community and talk to folks about how we would structure that, where would be the priorities and so forth. So we did go out and reach out to members of the public in that area to be able to do that. We worked with same sort of thing we were talking about, took comments from people when we talked about the rural broadband as another example. So we have reached out to selected members of the public to be able to get input on those programs to be able to do it. We don't have any plans to do anything beyond that, and I'd say stay tuned because we're going to get those programs announced. And then with regard to an ombudsman, I'd certainly just say, hey, if you've got an issue with any of these things, please just reach out to my office and we'll deal with it that way. Yeah.
Where would you say Nebraska is at on the coronavirus curve? Should people be feeling more comfortable going out? Is there still a risk?
So the question was, where is Nebraska on the coronavirus curve? Should people feel comfortable going out, and what about the risk? So if you look at, for example, our hospital capacity, the number of people that have been hospitalized in Nebraska, and there's kind of a curve, and we're on kind of the downward slide curve of that. Same thing with regard to the number of cases. Just a couple of days ago, we reported about 131 total cases out of about almost 2,500 tests. So again, it kind of goes up and down, but that's about a 5% positivity test rating. So that generally, again, is a lower number than we've seen in the last couple of months. So definitely, we're headed in the right direction here in the state of Nebraska. Now, can people feel comfortable going out? As long as you're continuing to practice our social distancing guidelines. So again, when you're out in public, and this is important, as we loosen restrictions, and this will always be the case, right? We loosen them June 1st. please continue to keep that 6-foot distance between you and other people. Make sure that you're washing your hands often. If you're going to go to the store, wear a mask, right? These are all ways that we can slow the spread of the virus. As we continue to slow the spread of the virus, that's how we can continue to loosen restrictions. So, I've gone to my favorite pizza place out for lunch. I think people can feel comfortable doing that. But again, I went to the store to buy my wife a birthday present. But when you go out, especially if you're going to the store or someplace like that, take those steps that we just talked about to be able to make sure that you're limiting the spread, and that's how we can continue to make sure we can loosen those restrictions. Yeah, Brandon.
The Shrine Bowl announced that they're moving forward with plans to play the game on July 11th. Have you had any contact with people organizing that or giving them any indication that that's something that will be able to happen?
So the question was, the Shrine Bowl is planning on going forward on July 11th. Have we had contact with the members of the Shrine Bowl? I know my chief of staff has had conversations with them, and we put our guidelines with regard to what, for example, large outdoor venues can do, and we're going to continue to update those guidelines. So I'd say stay tuned with regard to that. But I can't give you specifics with regard to that, but I know that the chief of staff has been talking to them about it. I don't know all the conversations, but we're going to continue as long as we continue to make progress. We're going to continue to loosen restrictions.
Do you have updated numbers on meatpacking and long-term care facilities?
Do we have updated numbers on the food processing and the long-term care facilities? Dr. Antone, you've got those handy. I think it was 3,929 confirmed cases for people in the meat processing industry. 3,929. Right, okay, 300, and right, do you want to just come up and give us all those? Yeah, great, thanks.
I think the question was repeated. Is it about long-term care and meat processing?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So for meat processing, 3,929 confirmed cases with 14 deaths, and 170 of those confirmed cases needing hospitalization. For long-term care, we currently have 126 facilities in the state of Nebraska that have had either a positive staff member or a positive resident of that facility test positive. So that is about 25% of all the long-term care facilities in the state of Nebraska. There's 533 residents of long-term care facilities that have tested positive, and 440 staff members that have tested positive.
You want to give the updates for the last couple of weeks?
So now they're keeping track of the last 2 weeks to see whether it's speeding up or slowing down. It seems to be slowing down somewhat. There's been only 16 facilities in the last 2 weeks that have reported either a positive resident or a positive staff member at their facility. And over this past 2 weeks, only 43 residents have tested positive and 54 staff have tested positive.
You want to give the total number of deaths?
The total number of deaths for a long-term care facility is 98 deaths.
All residents.
All residents of long-term care facilities. 98 residents of long-term care facility have died.
Are there any pending?
There is one pending at this time. Still pending death certificate validation. Yes.
Just while you're up there, what would you say are your areas of focus moving forward with this pandemic and keeping it under control?
So the question is what is my specific area of focus at this time? And it's been pretty much the same over the last couple months. And as being chief medical officer, I feel my responsibility is to make sure everybody that needs a hospital bed or an ICU bed or a ventilator or care of any sort is able to get that care. And as the governor's mentioned, we have maintained that capacity since day one, really, up to today. I see the trends now outside of Douglas County to be as stable as they have ever been. As a matter of fact, Grand Island St. Francis Hospital, which used to have a census of close to 40, even close to 50 COVID-positive patients, is down to 6 COVID-positive patients with only 1 patient in the ICU. In Douglas County, that's where our main focus is right now. We've had also very, very stable numbers over the last 2 weeks. Today we had 118 patients in Douglas County hospitals mainly, CHI hospitals, UNMC, and Methodist hospitals, and I'm just following those trends. One of the things I really am liking is that the number of patients that are needing ventilator care for helping with their breathing has gone down by about 10 to 12 patients over the last week or two. So that tells you the serious patients that need the ventilators. Ventilators have never been an issue as far as number of ventilators available, but it just tells me that things are getting more stable as far as people really getting ill. Yes?
Just under half of all the deaths in the state have been at those long-term care facilities. Does anything more need to be done there to keep that from continuing to go up?
So the question is as far as the long-term care facility deaths being at 98 and the total number of deaths today being 195, it's right at 50% of all the deaths in the state of Nebraska have been long-term care facility residents. And we've been through this a couple times before, but those are the highest risk patients that when they would contract the virus, they have a higher risk for just not surviving. We have, I think, our long-term care facilities, our ICAP teams, our teams that are keeping track of long-term care facilities, outbreaks, things of that nature, I think have done a great job. I mean, when you look, again, at the number of positive tests we've had, which are 16,025 positive tests, the other states that have similar positive tests have had a lot higher long-term care facility deaths and deaths overall. So I consider our overall death rate due to keeping that long-term care facility death rate down. But yeah, we're doing everything we can. We're actually working on a plan right now to even maybe start a reopening phase for some of the long-term care facilities. So shortly we'll have that plan available.
Quick question from Bill Shammer. He wants to know, do we have an update on the list of sports people can or cannot do? Do we have a timeline for when football and basketball and others will reopen?
So the question from Bill was, do we have an update on sports and contact sports, specifically basketball and football? And I'd say, Bill, just stay tuned. We're working, we just loosened restrictions June 1st. That was only, 11 days ago or so, 10 days ago. So we want to allow the opportunity, those loosened restrictions to play out here. And we're working on guidelines for those additional sports as well as other things. So I'd say just stay tuned for right now. Martha.
Douglas County is saying that they're willing to provide $25 million of their CARES Act money to the city of Omaha. In the past, you said the state was also going to contribute money. Do you know how much the state is going to put in? And is the $25 million sufficient?
So the question was, Douglas County has said they're going to put $25 million in to cover Omaha's costs for fighting the coronavirus. I've said the state is also going to pitch in. And do I know how much money that is? And do I think the $25 million is sufficient? I would say we don't know the answer to either one of those right now. We're going to be working with Douglas County with regard to making sure we're both aligned on the specifics of the expenses we're going to reimburse for the city. And then, of course, the city will have to show us those expenses and document them. And then we'll have kind of a better idea of what their costs are going to be on a run rate basis. So until we kind of get through that process of really firming that up, and again, part of that was dependent on getting Deloitte & Touche on board so we could, again, keep track and document all this. My understanding is Douglas County is also going to be using Deloitte & Touche, which will help facilitate that we're keeping this all the same between the state and the county with regard to covering those expenses for Omaha. So once we get the process all set up, we kind of agree on what those expenses we're going to cover, Omaha submits it, we'll have a better idea of what those overall numbers will be. So it's a process we're going to work through, and I know the mayor is probably anxious to find all that out. But again, we just kind of got to work through the process and make sure we document everything. And again, the whole point of documenting all this is just to make sure that at some point in the future, the Treasury Department doesn't come back and say, you owe us this money back because it wasn't specifically what we said you could pay for. Yeah, Lee.
I got a question for President Carter.
President Carter, would you please come up here? And please remember to repeat the question that Lee asked you.
The intention is obviously to have students back on campus, online classwork, that sort of thing, this upcoming fall. What are the reassurances that you can give those students that are coming tell those students and saying, you're going to be safe coming to our campus?
So the question is, what are we doing to assure students and family, and I'll add faculty and staff, that it's safe to come back? As you point out, there are some programs that we have, laboratories that are so experiential, it's very difficult to do online. So my answer to that is every one of our campuses has a dedicated Tiger team that is working through every detail. And as I've said to many of my counterparts across the nation, and I've been in some pretty high-level dialogue, not just Big Ten, but at the Ivy League level and other major campuses. You know, we're all working on trying to find out what the right answer is. What I have found out in higher ed right now, there are kind of three types of leaders. There are those that are paralyzed by decision right now, waiting for a perfect answer for what might come, maybe a cure. There are those that are just trying to wish this away. And then there are others, like we are doing here at the University of Nebraska, that are trying to understand the risk and mitigate it and do everything we can based on science, technology, procedures that we can follow to minimize any risk to our students, our faculty, and our staff. So what I would say is we will have gone through a lot. We will have done everything we can to de-densify our classrooms. We're going to use the benefits of the geography that we have naturally. We're pretty spread out, certainly here at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, but even at our metropolitan campus in Omaha, we are more spread out than a lot of other campuses. We will reduce our class sizes. There will be some programs where it is actually smarter and a good fit to be online. And there may even be some of our faculty members who say they're not comfortable because they may have some other issues or a certain age. We will look to accommodate every single situation. At the end of the day, what I would tell you is higher education is going to look different. Not just different because of the reality of COVID-19, but we're going to look different for what is the best vehicle to deliver the future of education. So what I would tell you is the future of education will probably never be all in person. What we have seen, in addition to that rise in applications, we've seen a tremendous rise in students signing up for online courses, not just here in the summer, highest we've ever seen in credit hours per student just this summer, but we're also seeing a rise at Omaha and Lincoln in student credit hours for online. Some of these are full in-person students, and some are coming to be full online. And finally, I would say for students that are thinking about a gap year, if you get a 4-year education at the University of Nebraska, your lifetime earning is going to be greater than $750,000 to $1 million over the lifetime. That's just with an undergraduate degree. Why would you miss out on that by taking a break and not going to some sort of educational post-secondary program? We have options for online, in-person, and even the in-person education will be a blend, and you're going to get the best value education that you can find anywhere in America. So we are excited about what we're going to be able to deliver. We will have real-time data, just as the governor's watching the data that comes through the medical and health professionals. We'll have that on our campuses. We'll have our own contact tracing capability. We'll have testing available for our students. And we are minimizing even the distancing or the spacing that we'll have even in our dormitories. So we are thinking through every detail to make sure that our campus is as safe as we can possibly make it.
The responsibility that you're putting on the faculty and staff to carry out, so to speak, these distancing rules, however you guys put them in place, what has been the conversations with those people in regards to, at the end of the day, they're keeping the students in those classrooms safe, going into dining halls, into the dormitories, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and again, I would congratulate the chancellors who are leading this effort on every one of our campuses, as well as all of the departmental leadership that's working through that. We're not done yet. We haven't, got it all exactly figured out. We have, about 2.5 months to get it to, the final conclusion on how that's going to look. It will definitely look different than last year, and I would just tell you that the good work that's happening confirms to me that we will be ready to open up our campuses on August 24th.
We have time for just a couple more questions.
Thank you.
The Environmental Trust Board is considering a proposal to override their grant committee's recommendation and give $1.5 million each year to green finance for blender pumps. Did you try to influence that decision, and is that a wise use of those dollars?
So the question was about the Environmental Trust Board meeting that's going on right now, and a proposal with regard to one of the grants to be able to go to install blender pumps in gas stations across the state. So let's take a step back, because you mentioned Green Plains. Green Plains was the generous corporate sponsor who volunteered to be able to help pull the grant process together. But the grant itself doesn't go to Green Plains. The grant goes to the gas stations who are installing those ethanol pumps across the state of Nebraska, which Green Plains doesn't own any. In fact, so what that benefits is everybody that is involved in the industry, whether it's our cattle producers, our corn farmers. We talked a lot about that. So, and this is something that's going to benefit an entire huge part of our overall rural economy here in Nebraska. So yes, it is a very wise use of our grant dollars to be able to help support this from that standpoint. It's also a very wise use of our dollars to be able to help clean up the air. Ethanol is a cleaner burning fuel. This is conservation, folks. This is conservation by cleaning up our air. So it is exactly in line with what we ought to be doing at the Nebraska Environmental Trust. So I absolutely support the work of the board to be able to help them, get for grants out to be able to help clean up our air here, make sure we continue to have clean air, and to make sure that we're supporting our industries here in the state of Nebraska.
Did you urge them to overturn their grants committee's recommendation?
Did I urge them? This actually is not the first time it's been voted on, and so I think I've talked to one member of the board since the original vote, and certainly supported their decision to give the grant out to be able to build those blender pumps. Absolutely, I support it.
Last question.
Martha, last question.
Okay, do you have any plans or thoughts for responding to the calls for police reform, law enforcement reform, some of the kinds of issues that were raised in listening sessions earlier this week and by the folks who've been out on the streets?
Yeah, so the question was, do I have any plans with regard to police reform? There's been a number of suggestions through the legislative hearing, listening sessions and so forth. And actually, I would say that we were ahead of the game. Let's go back to 2018 and LB 791. This was a bill that was going to bring greater accountability to law enforcement. And I'm going to be quite frank here, folks. It was the Democrats who watered this down. Go look at the voting record. Go look at the legislative record here. So I was trying, for example, to have the Crime Commission be able to subpoena internal investigation records on law enforcement. And that originally I proposed that the Crime Commission would be able to do that for every law enforcement agency. And ultimately what the legislature passed, and I signed the bill because it was still progress, was only for the Nebraska State Patrol. But I wanted that ability for the Crime Commission to be able to do that for all law enforcement agencies, to be able to help hold police accountable in every law enforcement agency. So we were ahead of the game going back 2 years ago to be able to help bring about some of these reforms with regard to law enforcement. And again, I just urge you to go back and look at the voting record, go look at the testimony on the floor, and see who was against it. This was a bill that originally was brought by Laura Epke. Joni Albright ended up being the champion for it. So, this was something that I supported a while ago. Now, I think the other thing we got to guard against is that while I continue to believe that we should look for reforms to help make sure we hold police accountable and that terrible instances like what happened to George Floyd don't happen again, making sure that we're holding police accountable for when they go outside their training. And in this case, we saw the horrible video where George Floyd was killed right there on cell phone camera. We can't let people with other political agendas tie their stuff in. So people have talked about, as part of this, legalizing marijuana. That has nothing to do with police enforcement or law enforcement reform. That's not a law enforcement reform issue. That is a separate political agenda. People talking about doing away with mandatory minimums. That is not a law enforcement reform. That is a separate political agenda. So we have to separate out some of what other people are trying to tie into this to what we ought to be pursuing with really legitimate things that we started 2 years ago with regard to law enforcement reform. So the question was, that was 2 years ago, do we have new plans? And certainly we're going to be looking at what opportunities are now available. Perhaps some of the folks who were against this 2 years ago will have a change of heart given the situation that's, with recent events. And so perhaps there is an opportunity to be able to, for example, extend that subpoena control to other law enforcement, or that subpoena ability for the Crime Commission to be able to do that for other law enforcement agencies. Also, part of that bill, for example, was we ended the ability of cops who had gotten fired or had bad records in one jurisdiction to be able to jump to another jurisdiction. So we ended the ability of that because we're tracking that. So there were a number of other reforms in that bill that were very good with regard to holding law enforcement accountable. And if there's an opportunity to be able to go back and get some of the things we asked for originally, we are interested. Well, again, folks, we got to get set up for our Spanish language briefing here, but thank you all very much again for joining us. Thank you to all the Nebraskans who are working so hard to slow the spread of coronavirus here in Nebraska. President Carter, you're blocking the camera, just so you know. Not the first person to catch on that. Again, thank you very much, everybody. Again, remind you, we'll be back here again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Central Time. Have a great day.